Right now, if you want to do multicolor printing, it's kind of been accepted that it's just a horribly wasteful process. But what if there was a better way? What if printing a dedicated support material was as easy as selecting it in the slicer and loading it up in your machine? And what if you could do all of that without getting into an abusive relationship with Bambu while you're at it? Well, that's the promise of the Snapmaker U1, and it is so close to delivering the perfect solution to all of that. And you know what also is a perfect solution? Today's sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay can be your one-stop shop for all your needs for PCBs and assembled SMD projects, machining work, exotic 3D printing, and even sheet metal fabrication. Right now, they're running a KeyKit design contest, and I love to see it because not only are PCBWay supporting open source software, but they're also encouraging contestants to share their entries as open source as well. So whether it's just a project that you need a couple of parts for that you can't fabricate yourself, or you're looking for a partner that can reliably provide you with injection molded components and assembled and tested PCBs, check out PCBWay. Use code PCBWay made with layers 10 for $10 off your order. And thanks again to them for sponsoring this part of the video and for supporting the open source community. Now, this printer is a huge jump. Not because it's a tool changer, because we've had those for a while. And in fact, we've actually had this exact one. I saw this little part right there. That is straight out of the Prusa XL. That is that exact ball bearing roller mechanism to lock the tool heads in place. It's the same sort of locking latch that ball bearing goes into. But the big thing here is that because there's now been so much groundwork already done by others, the U1 can just combine those things into a machine that is genuinely a good experience and sell it for a sticker price of under $1,000. It's the frame concept of a Bambu machine, tool changes straight from Prusa XL, clipper firmware that's battle tested by the Voron community, and makes use of the Orca slicer that now has a heritage that's more complicated than Genghis Khan's. For the last couple of months, the U1 has been in pre-order, and pricing has been fluctuating, but it now looks like it's going to be permanently on sale for $899. Officially, at this time, the U1 is now finished and released, but it's not really finished, and we'll get to that in a bit. Conceptually, I'm sure you've seen what the U1 is all about by now. It's a mid-size Core XY machine with a tool changer and 4 tool heads. Pretty much like a smaller Prusa XL, but much more streamlined. So this is all about multi-material. But a tool changer isn't the only way to achieve that. Of course, you can swap filaments in the middle of a print by hand, but automated filament changes have a couple of different options. The earliest one was just lugging around a second hot end on the same tool head, like you see on Ultimakers or now the Bambu X2D. It's simple, but unless there's an extra nozzle blocker hardware piece, that concept has issues with oozing, and you just have a whole bunch of extra weight that's being carried around. So de facto, this is constrained to just 2 tools and most often combined with less precise Bowden extruders to save some weight. With just one hot end though, there's of course the MMU, AMS or carrot feeders. Those are add-ons that can choose from a magazine of filaments to load and unload on the fly. And while that keeps the printer itself compact and simple, each swap takes quite a long time and wastes filament to flush out the previous one from the nozzle. I basically view these as more of a convenience option, so you can easily choose filaments in your slicer instead of having to manually swap them on the machine. But using them for multicolor or multi-material printing just goes against every grain in my body. I mean, you're buying filament just to throw away 3/4 of it. But then again, most people don't seem to mind only using 1/4 of what they paid for and throwing away the rest. Just looking at how many cars are still sold with combustion engines. So to cut down on filament swapping times and flushing waste, you basically need a dedicated hot end for each filament that you're going to use in one print, so that that filament just stays loaded in the hot end. There's full tool changers like the XL and the U1, which keep the filament loaded in one extruder paired to one hot end, and nozzle changers like the H2C or the upcoming Prusa Bondtech Index, which park just the nozzle and keep the rest of the extrusion mechanics on the gantry itself. The end result is similar, where you get little waste, but full tool changers tend to be mechanically and conceptually simpler to build and less encumbered by patents. So with all these options, the U1 chose the one that is the most optimized for low waste, quick changeover, and a low complexity design that is tried and tested, at the expense of making enclosing or heating the entire machine more difficult. Because they have permanently attached reverse Bowden tubes, these guys, tool changers need to have their filament going straight up instead of through a 90-degree bend like you see on the Bambu machines or, the Core 1, because using that same 90-degree bend on a tool changer would just make for a tangled mess. But what Snapmaker are spending more on materials for having 3 more extruders, I'm sure it still makes for an overall more affordable machine than licensing patents or engineering your ways around the hot end changing limitations. Now, in my X2D review, which the U1 is going head to head, I said that for how I personally use my 3D printers, the X2D probably is the better choice because it has a heated enclosure and it can still efficiently run just 2 materials, one for the main material and one for supports. That's all that I really need. But what I do isn't the only way that 3D printers are being used. So the U1 also has its use cases where it beats out every other machine, and one of them is obviously multicolor. You just don't have to think about whether you're going to use more than one color, more than one filament. You just do it, because there's almost no time or material cost to it. With the stock settings, it does print quite a substantial prime tower, but like any tool or hot end changer printer, that is just the safe default, and you should be able to turn down the amount of material it uses for that tower quite a lot without seeing any real downsides in the print quality. Or, turn it off entirely. Now, when trying to find test models to show off for the multicolor capabilities, I was actually a little shocked about how hard it was to find multicolor models. So many of the popular models are just optimized for printing explicitly without an AMS or MMU now, which means they can just print in separate pieces from different filaments, and then you assemble them after the fact. So showing off one of those on the U1 would be like going, wow, look what it can do, but it was completely pointless, right? Which brought me to this, or actually this one. This one is a bit nicer. This is actually an 8-color print, 7 in my case, and it's printed from just 4 filaments. Because the Snapmaker's filament changing is so efficient, there's now full spectrum slicer, which can generate mixed sort of meta filaments from the colors that you've got loaded, and use those meta filaments like it's just an extra filament slot. The way that those are being printed is with alternating layers of those base filaments, and it works shockingly well. I did use 0.08mm layers to get the best blending effect, and I experimented with whether the mixing would work best using an additive style RGB mixing, or whether you'd get more of a subtractive CMYK mix as the thin layers might sort of do subsurface scattering. 0.08 layers make it so that you have to look like really close to even notice that this is a blended filament. Like from this distance, I cannot see the mixed layers. But even when you do notice them, it's not exactly like an unpleasant look. And yeah, it's actually more of an RGB mixing look. The CMYK approach has sort of visibly less vibrant colors in the end. I think for mixing similar colors, this would be an almost imperceptible approach. But I also wanted to see how it would compare directly to the X2D for multicolor. And probably, to no one's surprise, it did absolutely fantastically here. Waste is way down, and so is print time. Interestingly, the X2D seems to struggle more with cooling on overhangs, while the U1 has visibly stronger VFAs, or motor resonance artifacts, but it also has a much more glossy finish overall, which makes them stand out a bit more. A glossier finish means that the filament got heated to a higher final temperature, either because the hot end was actually set to a higher temperature, or because it did a better job at, thoroughly heating the filament. Either way, a glossier part might bring out flaws more, but it also means you get stronger parts because of the improved layer adhesion. But that might be balanced out by the lack of an enclosure, especially for higher temp filaments. Let me know if you want me to do a full test video on exactly how much of a difference the part strength has between, enclosed, non-enclosed printers. The tool changing itself, though, worked absolutely flawlessly on the U1. This is thousands of tool changers, and there's 0 misalignment or dropped tools, which would be the worst case. In that regard, the tool changer is just completely invisible in the process. 3 things to call out though. 1, the first print with the CMYK mixing approach failed because the prime tower got knocked over. 2, on both prints, there seems to be a bit of a printing issue up top here with the black filament, where it prints much less filament per layer. I didn't catch it on camera, but it pretty often sounded like the unretract move after the tool got picked up was skipping and just didn't manage to get the filament back into the hot end enough. With all these little sections, that does sound like a heat creep issue in the hot end, but my studio sits at around 18 degrees and this is not an enclosed machine, so I don't think heat is that much of an issue. Maybe it's just that the factory settings for the unretracts are a little too aggressive. And third, 5 filaments would have been better. 4 is already quite good, but when you want to do full RGB colors and want to have a white and black filament to either, do mixing and tone those up or down, or to print as pure white or black, the 4 tools on the U1 are just one too few to do like full RGB full color in a single print. I mean, I could even see 6 or more tools being pretty useful when you want to do, full color plus an effect color like a metallic, a gold, or a fluorescent material, or maybe do a semi-translucent or a clear for light diffusion, dedicated support material. The options are endless for how much you can tack on here. I mean, if you're really into multicolor, then 4 actually ends up being just the base level bare minimum starting point. But still with that, the U1 is the most capable multicolor printer at its price point for sure. But the U1 also has its limits, and I realize I've not covered much of the actual hardware yet, so this might be a good time to do that. So 4 direct drive tools with a pre-feeder to load the filament. It's got a heated bed, of course, a 270mm cubed build area that is fully usable with any of the tools, so it can print a good bit larger than the Bambu X2D. The U1 runs on standard Clipper firmware, which is awesome, and not only that, but Snapmaker are also very open to letting you modify the firmware, and they will even honor the warranty, unless of course the software that you installed caused the issues in the first place. The UI, the networking components, and the app are proprietary though, and while they're obviously a bit more simplistic in just what you get through the interface, this thing turns off pretty quickly, everything's there, it's totally fine to use, and when it comes to bugs on the actual printer, there's only a couple, minor issues in edge cases that I've run into, nothing that's a showstopper at all. But to me, the bigger deal that I was unsure about was whether the lack of a full enclosure and any sort of heater would be a hard limit for printing high temp materials like ASA or polycarbonate, or would even affect larger prints with PETG. And yeah, you can definitely tell that just the extra bit of warmth from an enclosure does help with warping. But it's not nearly as bad as I thought as it would be. Because the U1 still has all 4 sides closed and only has the open top, you're not getting the sort of completely open airflow that you would get on a bed slinger or on an XL without the enclosure. By default, the slicer also likes to add a brim to most larger parts. Still on this one, even though this is all PLA. So printing the Prussian polycarbonate blend went surprisingly well, maybe in part because that stuff really likes to stick to the heated bed. But the larger PETG print from Carolyn did need some extra aggressive support material. That's this part. This one's the X2D. Then it printed really well. The first one did not go well at all. So out of the box, the lack of a top enclosure, top cover is not that big of a deal, and it's not that much of a hard limit. Snapmaker are currently letting you pre-order a molded enclosure for the top for $160. But apparently the 45-liter IKEA Samla also fits this machine just about perfectly. Yeah, that's pretty good. Just keep in mind that the U1 also has no air filtration out of the box, and you only get that with the Snapmaker top cover or as a DIY job. So again, that just sort of emphasizes that the U1 is intended more as a multicolor printer rather than a multi-material one. But I still tried. Embedding flexible elements into a rigid part, or rigid parts in this case, is one of those applications where gluing or screwing together individual prints just isn't gonna cut it. So I found this bracelet design that uses a flexible base material and then has these rigid hexagons printed around that. And you know what? The U1 actually handled it beautifully. At the second attempt, the first one, I thought I had grabbed some Galaxy Black PLA and loaded that up. But what I actually grabbed was carbon fiber PETG, and for that it's still printed surprisingly well, but it does come out better when you use the proper filaments. But back to the hardware. For Snapmaker, the U1 is a radically new approach to making hardware. They used to have these sort of all-aluminum multi-purpose machines, the jacks of all trades, with 3D printing, laser engraving, and CNC all in one machine. But this is now just a standard steel frame, sheet metal steel frame, plastic panels, and it is exclusively a 3D printer. And it kind of shows that this is a first for them. The fitment on the parts is not great, and the plastic clips are barely enough to hold many of the panels in place, which is made worse by the fact that the U1 has no provisions to be picked up. So more than once have I reached into the top to grab the steel frame, but I actually grabbed the plastic panel instead and almost ripped that out. Also for fitment, the door hinge over here is rubbing on the plastic panel because there's just not enough space, and maybe most annoyingly, the printer is laid out in a way where you just can't see what it's doing. I mean, presentation is something that Bambu does exceptionally well. I mean, that their printers are built all around that, and they have basically a full studio lighting setup in there, and they give you a perfect view of all the things they want you to see, and everything else is hidden away. But on the Snapmaker, this front bar just blocks everything. Snapmaker mounted the screen into that bar, so it's really tall, and because the toolheads don't have that extra height for the 90-degree filament bend, they also sit much higher in the frame on the U1. So to see your print, you can't look under the bar, and if you have it at a height where you can easily see over it, then the whole printer is down pretty low, and then looking at the screen becomes annoying. So, I don't know, maybe put like a window in here maybe? Oh, and the lights in the U1? Yeah, they're pathetic, they're super dark. I mean, none of this is a real deal breaker or anything, and the whole experience with this machine is still leagues better than many of the lower tier offerings. It's just that Snapmaker could have made this a much better user experience if they just spent a little extra effort. What I think happened is that they just ran out of development time for whatever deadline they set themselves, because they actually nailed much of the big stuff. For example, you never have to get to the back of the printer, which is awesome. I mean, I have this bench where I can just get up and walk around the machine as much as I want, but for example with the X2D, even that got pretty annoying with reconfiguring it for AMS, no AMS, swapping that between the left and right tool, changing things for loading flexibles. On the U1, use both sides of the machine, the poop bin comes out towards the front, I'll show you some B-roll of that, and you barely have to empty that in the first place. That's just all well done. Those last bits, I guess, are just part of the compromise you have to accept for all the other things that the U1 does really well at this price point. And about the thing where the U1 is finished and released, well, sure, the hardware could have benefited from an extra round of fine-tuning, but it's really good enough, and you could totally consider it done. But at this point, even Snapmaker are not confident in their software yet. The Snapmaker Orca Slicer is still in beta. I've had a bunch of random crashes with it, and every time you start it, there's about a 1-minute delay where you see the animated model page, but the program itself just stops responding. And getting filament synced from the printer and uploading print jobs to the printer is just more cumbersome and more clicks than in Bambu Studio or Prusa Slicer. Again, it's not a deal breaker, but I'm getting to an age where I do appreciate mature options over just going with the hottest one available to me. But then again, because the U1 is built in more of an open way, there's already a whole bunch of community improvements, like the full spectrum slicer or printable adapters for the Samla head. And in fact, yesterday, Snapmaker just straight up hired the developer of Full Spectrum Slicer. So that's pretty awesome to see, and I'm sure that'll put a significant boost to their slicer development. So, where does the U1 fit in? Well, despite all the things that are not perfect or not perfect yet, the U1 is a genuinely awesome machine because it does things that no other machine does, and that's multicolor printing, efficient multicolor printing. But you have to have the use case for it and the need for it. For a lot of prints, you can just as well print them in pieces and assemble them later. And if you only need multicolor in a single print, just every couple of months, yeah, an AMS style filament multiplexer might still be more than good enough if that means that you can get a printer that is otherwise better suited to your use case. And especially if your use case is printing materials other than PLA, you should really consider how much DIY effort or wait time for the extra enclosure you're willing to put up with. But when the shoe fits the U1, it fits really well. If you're into color painting your models, or you design everything you print for the purpose of printing in more than one color, then there's no other machine that does the things that the U1 does at its price point. But most of all, I love the fact that with the U1, we now have another truly legitimate option to choose from to fit your preferences and your use case. It's a moddable, open source friendly option that has a lot going for it. And I think that's a much better direction to move towards than actively trying to shut down the community's open source efforts. But that's my take on the Snapmaker U1. It's a nice printer. You can find the links to the U1 below. And as always, a huge thank you to the channel's supporters. You can also subscribe if you want to see more. Keep on making, and I'll see you in the next one.